Hello everyone, I'm Çağrı. Today I am going to talk about the inductive reasoning. Let's get started with the first title, inductive generalizations. The part discusses inductive generalizations, a type of argument that uses characteristics of a sample population to make claims about a larger population. It provides examples to illustrate how such arguments work and emphasizes the importance of ensuring that the conclusion does not overstate the evidence provided by premises. The strength of an inductive argument depends on the appropriateness of the conclusion to the evidence. The examples highlight the need for careful language in drawing conclusions, suggesting that the more modest claims are generally stronger. The passage also emphasizes that inductive generalizations are not intended to guarantee the truth of their conclusions, but rather provide strong support. There is an example about it. Sarah has sampled 5 chocolate bars from a particular brand, and all of them have been delicious and of high quality. Therefore, it is likely that most chocolate bars from this brand are delicious and of high quality. In this example, the sample population is the 5 chocolate bars Sarah has sampled, and the population as a whole is all chocolate bars from the specific brand. The argument is an inductive generalizations because it uses characteristic of the sample to make a claim about the larger group. The strength of the argument depends on representativeness of service sample and the extent to which her experience with those 5 chocolate bars can be generalized to the entire brand. I'm continuing with the next title, Evaluating Inductive Generalizations. The part discusses the evaluation of inductive generalizations and presents 3 critical questions to assess their strength. I'm starting with the first one. Are the premises true? Like deductive arguments, inductive arguments require true premises for strength. A cogent inductive argument has all true premises that provide strong support for the conclusion. And an example is given where a false premise weakens the argument, claiming most CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women, when in fact they're mostly men. The other one is sample large enough? Common sense suggests that sample size must be sufficient to justify conclusions about the entire population. The passage provides examples such as thousands of encounters with rabbits, where a large sample support a reasonable conclusion, and a small sample, like 3 students with purple hair, weakens the argument. The third one is the sample representative? An inductive generalization is weak if a sample is not representative of the entire population. The passage illustrates this with an example about nuclear bombs dropped on Japan, where a small and unrepresentative sample of 2 bombs does not accurately reflect the potential devastation of all nuclear bombs. In summary, the passage emphasizes the importance of true premises, a sufficiently large sample size, and a representative sample for strong inductive generalizations. It also highlights that these questions, although relying on common sense, are crucial in assessing the strength of inductive arguments. There is a example on the screen, as you can see. For above are the premise true? Is the sample large enough? Is the sample representative? You can read it. I'm not going to read it right now. These examples demonstrate how considering the truth of premises, the size of the sample, and its representativeness are crucial in evaluating the strength of inductive generalizations. I'm continuing with the next one, opinion polls and inductive generalizations. The text discusses the role of opinion polls as inductive generalizations, particularly in the context of political processes. It emphasizes the importance of having a large and representative sample in conducting polls. The passage introduced the concept of margin of error and provides a table showing the relationship between the number polled and the margin of error. It also discusses a historical example of a poll failure due to a non-representative sample. The passage highlights the challenges in achieving representative samples, citing the example of a flawed 1936 poll by the literary Diest. It emphasizes the need for random selection to avoid biases and explains potential pitfalls in different sampling methods, such as self-selecting samples and biases introduced by pollsters. The passage also addresses issues like dishonesty in responses, biased questioning, and potential impacts of the pollster's identity on respondents. In conclusion, the passage underscores the complexities and potential pitfalls in conducting reliable opinion polls, emphasizing the importance of careful sampling rather than questioning techniques to ensure accurate and unbiased results. And there is an example on the screen, as you can see again. I'm not going to read it. It's kind of long. You can read it, the examples. These examples demonstrates how factors like questioning clarity, sample size, representativeness, and potential biases in questioning or survey administration can impact the reliability of opinion polls. I'm continuing with the next title, statistical arguments. The part discusses statistical arguments, a type of inductive reasoning that draws conclusions about individual members or parts of a population based on percentages. Statistical arguments are evaluated on a continuum from strong to weak, depending on the likelihood that the conclusion is true. The key points of the part, the first one is statistical arguments. Statistical arguments infer individual characteristics from percentages within population. Examples are provided to illustrate how statistical arguments are formulated. The second one is strength and weakness of statistical arguments. The strength of a statistical argument is determined by the likelihood that the conclusion is true, with a continuum from strong to weak. A statistical argument is strong when evidence suggests the conclusion is more likely true than false. Conversely, a statistical argument is weak when the evidence indicates the conclusion is more like false than true. The third one is softening conclusions. Softening conclusions with words like probably can increase the reliability of statistical arguments. Examples demonstrate how using such qualifiers makes arguments more cautious and less absolute. The fourth one is the reliability of statistical arguments. The reliability of statistical arguments is not solely determined by the percentage involved, but it is a practical consideration. Practical reliability is assessed by asking if a reasonable person will act or bet on the conclusion. The fifth and the last one is examples. Whereas examples are presented to illustrate the strength and reliability of statistical arguments based on different percentages. In summary, the passage explores the nuances of statistical arguments, emphasizing the importance of evidence strength, the role of qualifiers in softening conclusions, and the practical reliability of such arguments. There is an example on the screen. Is like premise 1 and premise 2, and there is a conclusion again. You can read it. It's analyzes part. These examples demonstrate how the strength and reliability of statistical arguments can be influenced by the formulation of the conclusion and the use of qualifiers to acknowledge uncertainty. I'm continuing with the next title, is statistical arguments. Oh, I'm sorry. It's reference class. Uh, in statistical arguments, the strength and reliability are influenced by how well the subject of the premise aligns with the subject of the conclusion. And there's just some key points about the references class. Reference class and specificity. The subject of a premise should be as similar as possible to the subject of the conclusion. The more specific the reference class, the better the argument. Changing the reference class can alter the strength of the argument. A more specific reference class may lead to different conclusion. The other undertitle is group versus individual conclusions. A statistical argument can support a conclusion about a group rather than individual. For example, 90% of college students are in favor of not having a cumulative final exam. So probably 90% of Wexford College students are in favor of not having a cumulative final exam. The third below title is softening conclusions. The use of qualifiers like probably can enhance the strength of the argument, especially when the reference class is more specific. In summary, the strength of reliability of statistical arguments depend on how well the reference class aligns with the subject of conclusion, and sometimes often the conclusion with qualifiers can improve the argument's overall strength. And there is a two example about it. First one is about cumulative final exam, and the other one is about the teacher of the year. I'm continuing with the next title, induction and analogy. Actually, there is some below titles, and I'm going to tell the induction and analogy with them. The first one is what is an analogy? Analogies play a crucial role in critical thinking, involving the comparison of things based on shared similarities. Understanding analogies is important for various contexts, from exams to literature. In the analogy, up is to down and right is to the correct answer is left, because the relationship is one of opposites. Analogies are pervasive in literature, and similes, a form of analogy using like or as, are common. In literature, smiles may serve to evoke emotions rather than strictly adhere to logical analysis. Analogies are tools for comparison that rely on shared similarities between different classes. The next title is How Can We Argue by Analogy? An argument from analogy is type of inductive reasoning that relies on a similarity between two or more things. Unlike a simple analogy that highlights a similarity, an argument from analogy goes further by claiming that additional similarities exist based on the recognized similarities. The general form of an argument from analogy can be represented as follows. A has characteristics X, B has characteristics X, A has characteristics U. Therefore, B has characteristics U. This basic structure can be expanded to include more details, as shown in the example. The post office and the Department of Motor Vehicles are both government agencies, and both were closed on Veterans Day. The post office is closed for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Therefore, the Department of Motor Vehicles must be closed for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. This expanded form includes additional characteristics shared by both A and B, making the argument from analogy more detailed. The next title is Evaluating Arguments from Analogy. In evaluating arguments from analogy, there are several factors to consider. First, truth of the premises. Like any argument, the premises must be true for the conclusion to be reliable. Second one is relevance of similarities. The similarities presented in the analogy should be relevant to the conclusion. Not all similarities are equally meaningful. Third one is number of relevant similarities. The more relevant similarities, the stronger the argument. Fourth, relevance of dissimilarities. Consider whether any dissimilarities are relevant to the conclusion. Some differences may weaken the argument. The fifth, number of relevant dissimilarities. The more relevant dissimilarities, the weaker argument. The sixth, diversity of the sample. A larger and more diverse sample can strengthen the argument as long as the diversity is relevant. Seventh and the last one is specificity of the conclusion. A less specific and broader conclusion tends to strengthen the argument, overly specific conclusions may weaken it. In summary, when assessing the strength of an argument from analogy, these factors should be taken into account to determine the reliability and validity of the conclusion. The next title is Arguing by Analogy. In constructing a good argument from analogy, the following criteria should be considered, which are also for evaluating side arguments. The first one is truth of premises. Ensure that the premises of the analogy are true. Second one is relevance of similarities. Identify relevant similarities that support the analogy. The third one is number of relevant similarities. The more relevant similarities, the stronger the argument. Fourth, relevance of dissimilarities. Consider whether any dissimilarities are relevant to analogy. Fifth, number of relevant dissimilarities. The fewer relevant dissimilarities, the stronger the argument. The sixth, diversity of sample. A more diverse sample, especially with increased size, can strengthen the argument. Seventh and the last one is specificity of the conclusion. Avoid claiming too much in the conclusion. A broader and less specific conclusion tends to strengthen the argument. A provided example illustrates these criteria in action. In this example, an analogy between learning criteria and learning critical thinking is constructed effectively. The premises are true, the similarities are relevant, dissimilarities are not relevant to the point being made, there is a good number of similarities, and the conclusion is appropriately specific, making it a good argument from analogy. The next title is Induction and Causal Arguments. In this part, the focus is on inductive arguments that aim to identify cause and effect relationships. Humans by nature seek knowledge of cause and effect, especially when surprised by events. The concept of cause and effect is integral to our understanding of world. Though it is challenging to establish such relationships definitely. The discussions delves into the difficulty of identifying true cause and effect relationships, emphasizing the need for careful evaluation. The example of Hume and Russell is used to illustrate the challenges in assuming causations based on observed patterns. Causal arguments are often inductive, providing evidence for a probable conclusion rather than a certain one. Two types of causal arguments are presented arguments about the cause of a single instance and arguments about a general relationship. Examples are given for both types, highlighting the inductive nature of these arguments. The passage stresses the importance of true premises and careful observation in constructing meaningful causal arguments, acknowledging the limitations of human perception and memory. The discussion also touches on the practical difficulty of considering every possibility in causal arguments, leading to the predominance of inductive reasoning. The passage concludes by mentioning the value of experience, particularly in specific contexts, to establish cause and effect relationships with more certainty. And there is an example on the screen. Imagine someone observing that every time they wear their lucky socks, their favorite sports team wins. They might mistakenly infer that wearing the socks causes them to win. This illustrates the challenge of establishing true cause and effect relationships and a common pitfall of assuming caution based on observed patterns. And the next title is Correlation and Cause. Correlation refers to the mutual presence of or absence of two things or events. Positive correlation may suggest a causal link, while negative correlation may indicate prevention. However, correlation doesn't imply causation. The significance of correlation depends on the sample size and must be large enough to be within an acceptable margin of error. The small samples, even with strong correlations, may not be significant. Significance is determined by comparing correlation in control studies. For example, a study showing 67% of those taking vitamin C remained healthy is significant if compared to a control group. However, correlations may be confounded by other factors. Critical evaluation is essential when arguments infer causation from a correlation, as correlation can result from coincidence and does not guarantee a cause and effect relationship. And there's another example on the screen. Ice cream sales and drowning incidents show a positive correlation in summer. It might seem like ice cream consumption causes drownings, but the common factor is this season influencing both. Correlation doesn't imply causation. And I'm going to stop here because of the noise. I'm sorry. I'm going to continue 5 minutes later. I'm sorry, I'm continuing right now. And I'm continuing with the next title, a few words about probability. The discussion on probability in context of inductive reasoning is important because all inductive arguments involve probability. Inductive arguments provide evidence that makes their conclusion probable but not certain. There are different senses of probability. Epistemic probability expresses how likely we think an event is based on our beliefs. Relative frequency probability applies information about a group to an individual case, relying on accumulated data from observed group behavior. And third, a priori probability involves odds that can be calculated independently of sensory observation, such as the 50% chance of getting tails on a fair coin toss. Each type of probability serves different purposes, from expressing personal beliefs to making predictions based on observed data or mathematical calculations. And there is an example about it. If you believe your friend is usually late, you might assign a high probability they will be late to your meeting. Relative frequency probability, if 80% of students who studied for a test passed, you might predict an individual student's success based on this group data. A priori probability, knowing the nature of a fair coin, you can predict a 50% chance of getting tails without observing specific coin tosses. And the last title is a closer look at a priori probability. Text that discusses probability in the context of events such as driving cars or pulling the lottery. When considering the probability of either of two events occurring, their individual probabilities are summed. On the other hand, the probability of both of two independent events occurring is calculated by multiplying their probabilities. The text also highlights the gambler's fallacy, emphasizing that past events have no impact on the probability of current random events. For example, the likelihood of drawing a 7 again after drawing 1 previously remains the same. It discusses roulette and lottery, explaining that each spin or a draw is a random event unaffected by previous outcomes. The concept of this diminishing marginal value is introduced, illustrating that the relative value of additional bets decreases with quantity. Expected value, the payoff or loss expected from making a bet, is introduced. Bets with positive, negative, or neutral expected values are discussed. The text concludes by emphasizing relative value, the value a bet has in relation to an individual's needs, preferences, and resource. The lottery, particularly Powerball, is used as an example to illustrate how expected value and diminishing marginal value apply to real-life scenarios, emphasizing that even with negative expected value, people may still buy tickets due to the relative value of the dreaming of winning. And there is an example, as you can see, rolling a die, probability of rolling 3 or 4 is 1 to 3, but rolling 3 and getting ahead is 1 to 12 due to independence. Past rolls don't affect future coin tosses. Other example, a $1 ticket with a low chance of winning may have a negative expected value, but people still buy for the dream of winning, showcasing the impact of relative value of over objective probabilities. That's all for today. Thank you for listening to me.